the end of the 6 days of the creation. So now we got an idea about the first creation, what it is, and the second creation. Now, we would like to compare between the evolution theory and the Quran. In fact, the evolution cannot be approved by the Quran for many reasons, and this is what we are going to show right now. The first thing that the evolution theory depends on is the tree of life. The tree of life is actually relating between all the living things together to end at the root, which is the extremely small single cell living thing. We are all the descendants of that very little thing that is made of one single cell. This thing is not accepted in the Quran for the reasons below, or the verses that defy this claim of the evolution theory. The first two verses in chapter 87, verse 2, it says, "Who created and then fashioned, and who determined then guided." So the creation of the living things and all the primary things of the universe, including the living things, were created before the Big Bang. Dead, motionless postponed until the crack started. So this is the first thing, defies the tree of life. The second thing, we have verse 11 in chapter 42, which says, "Allah is who created the skies and the earth, who made for you from yourselves pairs, and from the cattle pairs, by which He makes you reproduce, nothing like Him, and He is the all-hearer and seer." Allah is who cracked the skies and the earth. So the verse is talking about the period of the crack time, and not the crack time, and not, or the Big Bang time, and not of the creation from the primordial. That's before the primordial water. So these primary things created and fashioned before the crack, they emerged into the universe bubble when the crack happened. Verse number 3 says, "And who determined then guided." Determined means determined the time of the Big Bang, the time of the crack, and the time they become alive to emerge into the universe bubble, as verse 11 says. Verse 11 is telling that they became alive during the crack time, and it specified the modern human and bashar, or the bashar creation, or the human creation of those that had their pairs from themselves, and we will discuss that later too. And also the pairs of the cattle. We have also verse number 1, chapter 35. It is also talking about the crack time. Praise to Allah. Praise be to Allah, who made a crack in the skies and the earth. So it is talking about the time of the crack, when these primary things emerged into the universe bubble, and then after He made the angels, messengers having wings 2, 3, and 4. He multiplies creation what He wishes. That is Allah, He is the all-powerful upon everything. So the 4 verses we just talked about indicates for that the tree of life doesn't exist, because all creations, whether they were living things, primary things of living things, or the skies and the earth, existed during this very, very, very early period or stage of the creation of the universe. We also have here verses number 5 and 6 in chapter 77 Al-Mursalat, which says, followed by those who recite the reminder, excusers or warders. These are the end shape in the primordial water of the living things. Those who recite the reminder, they are the angels. The excusers, they are the cattle and the mobile creatures. The warners, they are the bashar and modern human. So all of these verses are talking about the time from the crack of the sky or the start of the Big Bang, the zero time, to the time of the primordial water. We still doesn't have, at this period, we don't have the atom complete, we don't have the light complete, we don't have the galaxies ever existed yet, because at the end of this stage, the creation of the galaxies and the universe, the skies and the earth, will start, including the second creation of the living things. The second point that the evolution theory depends is the probability and randomness. And this is a thing that also doesn't work with the Quran verses. So we have here verses number 2 and 3 in chapter 87 Al-A'la, which says, verse 2, which says, who created and then fashioned? We just talked about this because they existed at the Big Bang time, motionless, dead, and then when the crack happened, they gained life and started to emerge to the universe bubble. But the second verse, verse 3, which says, and who determined then guided. The determined is the determination of the start of the crack and giving the dead primary things their life to emerge into the universe bubble. Then guided. This exactly the opposite of what evolution theory is saying. They say they behaved randomly and according to probability. But here it says they were guided. Allah guided them into this universe, into their path in this universe. So the primary things never moved randomly and never matched by probability. But they were guided to how to emerge, they were guided to have their life, they were opposites, and the Higgs interacted with them and they had their masses. Then they became part of the primordial water or formed the primordial water. In the primordial water, the perfection in their band started. All of these creations did not happen randomly or did not happen by probability. All were guided, and within a certain path they were behaving upon. The third point, evolution theory says, or the evolution theory don't know what is the origin of life. These primary things, or these living things, creatures, how did they become alive? They are dead matter. As they can see it, they see it as hydrocarbons, which are just matter, has no life. They are silicates, they are iron, all of them are minerals, came from this earth. All of them dead. Okay, how did they gain the life? This puzzle, they confuse them and they don't know how did that happen. So the origin of life for the evolution theory is something like a mystery for now. The answer to that in the Quran, as verse number 5 and 6 in chapter 77 says, at the end of the first creation we had those that recite the reminder, which are the origin of the angels, existed. The excusers, which are the origin of the mobile creatures, existed. And the warners, the origin of the modern human and bashar, existed. In addition to that, during the perfection in the bends of these primary things, the dark matter was created, and because the dark matter existed because of breakage in the strings of these primary things that emerged from the crack time, when they broken, they initiated some wind. The primary things or strings that belong to the modern humans and the angels and the cattle, that wind existed, belongs to them. It is part of the total decaying wind blow. Its source, the dark matter. So this wind that belongs to the strings that are the origin of the living creatures is the life causative wind, a thing that we call today as the spirit. So the spirit existed, and the main part, or the first creation of these living things, existed as excuser, warners, and those that recite the reminder. Actually, they are not from hydrocarbons. At this period, it is only, we are talking about pairs of strings, subparticles. It's like they are, in this case, they are just like the electrons and protons, and they didn't reach the stage of atom. So it is not the DNA, and it is not anything that is composed from the earthly matter, which doesn't exist at this period. So now the basics existed with the wind that give them the life. By that we can figure out that the evolution theory cannot be approved by the Quran unless some changes happens. Now we'll start with the details of the brief we just talked about. We'll start with the angels. Verse number 1, which says, verse number 1, chapter 35, which says, "Praise to Allah, the initiator of the crack of the skies and the earth, who made the angels messengers having 2, 3, and 4 wings. He increases in the creation what He wishes. That is Allah, He is the all-powerful upon everything." So, the angels, they're primary particles. The universe started, as we said, prior to the crack, primary particles or strings of everything were created, including the living things. One of them are the angels. They were brought to this universe bubble through a crack during the start of the Big Bang, or the crack of the skies and the earth. The crack is a cut happened in the surrounding where these housings of the categories of these primary things existed, and exposed them free. The housings had cuts in their rims, and they started to emerge or flow in the universe bubble. So one of them are the angel primary things. They were many. The angel primary things, they were many. And they passed through the same stages of perfection the other primary things of the universe passed through. So the first stage, the primary things, actually the primary things, they are opposites, negative and positive. So when the perfection happened in their bands, some of them couldn't have the changes in their bands, and they annihilated. But before annihilation, they broke the strings of the opposites, broke into two parts. One part became the dark matter, the other part, which was the part annihilated with the negative, the positive part annihilated with the negative part of that primary matter. When they broken into two parts, a wind initiated by that, which later became in total became the decaying wind blow, which is known today as the dark energy. And this decaying wind blow, it is not all of them of the same kind or one united as one kind, but they are varied or different according to the origin they came from, like the living things. The decaying wind blow that came from the living things became the life causative wind. The decaying wind blow that came from the weak force particles, that primary things that belong to the weak force, they became as they conveyed consecutively. So every part of that decaying wind blow belongs to a certain origin. All together they can unite and work as what we call the dark energy. During that, and when annihilation finished, the matched particles, there was a residue of these primary particles or primary things. The residue, they could or were able to match between each other. So when matching between each other, they could form the or could have more perfections to result into the angels, as we can see here. They are opposites, but could have the perfection in them, and each of these primary of these opposite primary things, each of them had changes in their bands, performed changes in their bands, and produced a kind of the angels. So this first one had changes in its bands, produced the angels with no or with one wing. The other one produced angels with 2 wings. The other one produced angels with 3 wings. The other one with 4 wings. And the fifth one, angels with other properties. We have in the verse it mentioned 2, 3, and 4 wings, and he increases in the creation what he wishes. That means there are other kinds of angels and have different properties than those ones, not mentioned exactly what properties they have. The angels does not have a sex. They are not males or females. They came as no sex creation, and later they when the electromagnetic field and the light existed, they interacted with the light to become the angels. Now they are the primary things of the angels. We still have the pairs of primary things of the kinds of the angels. So the kinds of the angels just initiated in this period, but they are not complete angels until the electromagnetic field separate from the weak force and the photons and the light exists. They interact with the light to form the angels that we know. Verse number 11, chapter 42, which says, Allah is who cracked the skies and the earth, who made for you from yourselves pairs and from the cattle's pairs, by which he makes you reproduce. Nothing like him, and he is the all-hearer and seer. So that verse 1 in chapter 35 specified the angels. Verse 11 is specifying the Bashar and modern human who had their pairs from themselves and the cattle. The verse is also starting with the crack time. That means these primary things of the Bashar and the cattle existed with the primary things of the skies and the earth, dead, motionless, prior to the crack or the Big Bang or zero time of the Big Bang, and they gained life when the crack happened, and they also passed through the perfections in the primary things bands, same as other primary things of the universe. And when the residue existed after the annihilation, we had the same thing as the angels. We had the pairs of primary things for the Bashar, single, not pairs, like this is for a single sex of Bashar, not male and female. Same thing for the cattle and same thing for the other kinds of Bashar. We have only single sex of Bashar, pair of primary things. Now how the pair from themselves, or what does the pair from themselves means? It has a speculation, let's say. It has like these strings. They merge between each other. But when perfection is happening to them, they broken into two parts. Like the positive string broken into two parts and the negative string broken into two parts. So two parts became of the positive and negative became the male, and the other broken two parts became the female. So we have this primary thing here, broken into two parts, this part and this part, and the positive broken into this part and that part. This one became the male of the bashar, and the other broken part became the female of the bashar. So that's could be the answer on how they were created, on how the pairs were created from themselves. This is a property existed only in the bashar and modern human, not any other mobile creature, any other kind of humans. Not any of them had such a property. So they are distinguished by this feature from the beginning, and they can never have a relation with any other mobile creatures or any other kinds of humankind. A single sex primary thing, pair of primary things merged with each other, remained as singles, produced like primary things, pairs of primary things of single bashars. Here, other kinds of humans, here we said like the one pair of primary things broken to form the male and female. Here they couldn't break, so the complete one became a male, and another one identical to this had perfections in its bends and could be the female of the same kind. So this is different kind of this is a different kind of human race than the modern human and bashar like Adam, those that have their pairs from themselves. Confirming here, all of them are pairs of primary things. They are similar to the electrons, protons, and they are not a complete, like, they don't have a complete existence yet. So, actually the living things, they are not exactly only from the protons and electrons. They had a different thing in them which made them living things, which are these primary things, pairs of primary things. The cattle had similar perfection in their bends to the humans, but they couldn't have their pairs from themselves. So the cattle, same as the other kinds of humans, two separate positive and negative pair of matched primary things. One of them became the male of the cattle, the other perfected and became the female of the cattle. The cattle is 8 pairs, from them the cow, the sheep, and the camel. These pairs that couldn't, or the pairs that had perfections but didn't have females, they became the mobile creatures that reproduce by fission, like the bacteria or amoeba or anything else, viruses maybe. And the other kind here, perfection happened to these strings, bringing the males, producing the males of all kind of the mobile creatures and the females of all kinds of the mobile creatures. Here are only the cattle, the 8 pairs of cattle. Here the viruses and the bacteria, and here all the pairs of, or the two sexes of the other mobile creatures. Again, they are just primary things, pairs of primary things, and not a complete creation from hydrocarbons or whatever. It is a very early stage before that could happen. The evolution theory is telling that the humans and the apes are either brothers that evolved from one primitive creature, or they are descendants to each other, like the humans are descendants of apes, or the humans and the apes are descendants of a primitive creature. As we said, this is, according to the Quran, cannot happen, because we have every living creature existed in the primordial water, including those that exist by the reproduction. So here, the primary things of the mobile creatures and plus the human primary things, they will produce a human ape. That's according to the evolution theory. We have no indication for that in the Quran. Like, let's say, as we see here, these primary things of the mobile creatures, like the positive string of this mobile creature matches with the negative string of the human, or vice versa. We don't have any indication in the Quran about this. I'm talking about the primitive ancestor that the evolution theory predicted is actually just in the theory. They don't have a proof for it. And even though they are saying that we find this and that in the DNAs, the cloaking of the genes in the DNAs shows that this or that, still there is no strong or solid proof or evidence that this primitive actually existed. So it is still cannot be taken as a fact. But just in case, like, we want to get the things closer to what they are thinking. Let's say if that really happens, Allah, the Creator, guided the primary things of the humans and the mobile creatures to match, like, the positive with the negative, to form, let's say, the human ape, and the negative with the positive to form the ape human. The human ape, the human has the properties of ape, and the ape human has an ape has some properties of the human. So that if Allah guided them to do that, then that is the reason, because Allah guided them. It's not, or did not happen randomly, or did not one come an ancestor, become an ancestor of the other. Like, I know this something is weak, because like when having sexual connection between the human and the mobile creatures, let's say a cattle, they cannot produce like an offspring because of that connection, which is ridiculous. Something never happened. This weakens the idea that they had touch between each other. But just in case they are telling something true, let's say, they proved it somehow in their labs, whatever the means they use. So if they have something like that, it could happen by Allah command and guidance, that these match with the mobile creature primarily, match with the human primary things to produce that human ape, which is really, really something weak and maybe never happened. Confirming the Bashar that had their pairs from themselves, they had their property that differentiated them from any other creatures, and they no way they have any relation with to the mobile creatures or other kind of the human beings. In the end of this period, the pair system existed. The pair system in the universe, including the primary things of the skies and the earth and the living things. Like each particle is made of two strings, opposite strings that matched or has resonance in their vibration pattern, forming the particles. All of them existed at this period. We have verse number 49 in chapter 51, which says, "And from everything we created pairs, perhaps that you remember." Imam Ali described this point by saying, "And he perfected the bands in the created things," and that's what we just discussed previously. And perform their limits. Performing their limits is the creation of the gravity sky, and they were limited. The primordial water was limited from spreading outside that limit of the sky, and he matched by his might between the opposites. So after the annihilation of the matter and antimatter, he matched. After they had the perfection in their bands, Allah matched by His might between the opposites or the primary things of these matter. Same thing, Imam Ali al-Rida, the ninth Imam of al-Shia, who said, also by making the things and contradicting between them, we know that he does not contradict with anything. He caused the light to contradict the darkness by the wet, the rough by the smoothness, and the freezing by the warm. So at this period, every contradicting thing existed. All opposites existed in this period, including the freezing and the warm, the rough and smoothness, the dryness and wet, and also the pairs of the humans and pairs of the particles, pairs of the cattle and the angels too. At the same time, we have Professor, according to Professor Hawking, in his book, The Grand Design, he said the strings vibrate, forming patterns. When these patterns match other strings patterns, reach a resonance state. The vibrating of these strings and matching between their patterns determine the particle dignity. So the vibrating pattern of each string can have resonance with other string vibrating pattern to determine the particle properties and dignity, which is the same as the two Imams are telling about, and what is the verse is telling. So there's a compromise between the science today and the Quran and the Imams at this point. At the end of this period, all the pairs existed of all creatures, all living things, and all the matter and energies existed in pairs. And ready for the second creation. This is the end of our lecture today, and thank you for listening.